Today we're going to be making these pumpkin abominations from the Delicious in Dungeon anime. Now, I've made quite a few miniature pumpkins and jack-o'-lanterns before, but these guys are a completely different beast. This is what my orange clay looks like after I've rolled it through my pasta roller about 20 times. It looks like delicious cheddar cheese. Then I add some yellow clay into my orange clay until I've got a nice pumpkin color that I'm happy with. And I'm happy. Alright, next I'll take a piece of the pumpkin colored clay and roll it into a ball in my hands. And I'll just keep rolling it until bippity boppity pumpkin man. Just kidding, I wish it was that easy. So the actual first step is making a ball of foil. So that's just regular aluminum foil. Then I cover that ball of foil with some pumpkin clay and roll that into a smoother ball shape, making sure to remove any visible air bubbles because air bubbles are clay's #1 enemy. Then I add the pumpkin lines in with a needle, and then I go over those same lines again with an extra large needle tool. And then I like to use mineral oil to smooth out the clay surface before baking it. It's also good for getting rid of dust sometimes. So after baking it in the oven for 15 minutes, my pumpkin has now become an onion. I cut it open to try to figure out what caused it to pop up at the top like that. And guess what? It was an air bubble. So it looks like the foil had a big indent in the top of it that caused an air gap, which then caused the clay to pop up. Alright, from the top, foil ball, wrap in clay, make the lines again, moisturize. Then I cut the side of the pumpkin where I wanted to sculpt the face, and I cut a little too far and got to the foil, but that's fine, right? Then I started doing the sculpting process, making the eye holes, adding the nose, adding the brow, adding the lips. And after baking it, I noticed another freaking air bubble. Are you kidding me? So I try sanding it, and then adding the whites of the eyes, and moisturizing again. But you know what? I hate it. So at this point I tell myself, I need to take this more seriously and look at some sculpting videos and do this the right way. So I do all the stuff that you've already seen for the most part. Cleaning up the eyebrows, cleaning up the nose, fast forward, and I hate it. The good news is that this is the point where I really started liking how my pumpkins looked, so much so that I decided to start naming them. I also decided that I needed to be making more than one pumpkin at a time so that I could fail faster and minimize the amount of time that I was running my oven. So instead of cutting off the entire pumpkin face side, I realized that the only thing I needed to cut was the eye holes, and that every other facial feature actually looked good on top of the original pumpkin surface. Then I add the whites of the eyes, making sure to leave some room for glow clay on top of the white so that the eyes can glow really cool like this in the dark. With the eyes done and baked, I add on the first nose bridge and smooth it out with my sculpting tools and with some mineral oil. And then after almost every sculpting step, I look at the pumpkin from every angle to make sure everything looks right and that it's symmetrical, because it can look good from 3 angles but then completely wrong from the 4th angle. And that was really my biggest challenge in making these guys, just trying to keep them as symmetrical as possible. I add some glue to the sides of the nose so that I can attach the nostrils. And every step that involves attaching raw clay onto the pumpkins begins with adding clay glue first to make sure that they properly adhere to the already baked clay. And similarly, every time that I attach and sculpt a new piece of raw clay onto the pumpkin, I bake it in the oven for about 10 minutes so that I can basically save state the rest of the facial features. If I didn't bake them in between each step, then I'd be risking smushing everything together anytime that I added a new feature. Sculpting the lips was the most time-consuming facial feature to work on because lips are weird and it's really easy to make them look like duck lips. But I think after about my 13th attempt, I got the hang of it. Also, some of the lip detailing had to be done with tiny sanding sticks after baking because it was really difficult to get my sculpting tools into such tiny spaces without smushing everything together and ruining the lips. Here I'm giving Jeff a second nose bridge to make the nose pop out more realistically. And then he gets some clay eyebrows added on top of his glue eyebrows. And this is my favorite part right here. Cleaning up the eyebrows and deciding on a facial expression for the pumpkin. With the eyebrows done, it's time for a snack break. This is the point in filming when I realized I need to record every step for just one pumpkin. So the rest of these steps will be of Mr. Pee-wee. Here he's getting his chin made and his beautiful chin crack added. I realized after staring at him for a while that his eyes weren't quite symmetrical, so I added some slivers of clay above his eyes in an attempt to even them out. After baking, he's ready for some irises. This tiny ballpoint tool is my absolute favorite for painting dots onto things, and I typically prefer it over a paintbrush when it comes to painting eyes or eye details. And now for the scariest part, cutting off the top of the pumpkin to begin the ensoupening process. Luckily, the clay I'm using is super flexible, so it doesn't easily crack or crumble when it's cut. Most polymer clays would be a crumbly mess if I tried cutting them like this, but this is cos clay, so it's super flexible and it's my favorite clay to work with. Then I remove the foil and start trimming the inside of the pumpkin so that it has a narrower lip. You'll notice here that the inside of my pumpkin is a different color than the outside, and that's because during my first step I added translucent clay over the foil ball, I baked it, and then I added the pumpkin layer on top of that. This way I could minimize any issues caused by air bubbles in the foil. After doing all the soup making steps with Pee-wee here, the final soup actually turned out green rather than orange, so I cut it all out and I added a layer of orange clay inside. Then I added some translucent liquid clay on top of that and sprinkled in these pumpkin pieces, which are just tiny pieces of baked pumpkin clay that I cut into tiny chunks. After baking for 15 minutes, we're ready for the final layer, which is clay gloss mixed together with some orange and brown chalk pastels. And this is what it looks like after air drying for about 1 hour. Next up is the stem making process. I use some translucent yellow clay for this. I roll it out into a cone-like shape and then attach it to the top of the pumpkin lid. Next, I alternate between using some ballpoint tools and my bristle brush to texture the sides and the top of the stem. After baking the stem for 15 minutes, I add a layer of dark green paint, trying my best not to get too much of the paint on the orange part of the pumpkin. The top of the stem gets a dry brushing of the dark green paint, since I still want some of the yellow clay to show through at the top. After letting the dark green paint dry for a few minutes, it's time for a light green dry brushing to bring out the details of the stem texture. And the final step after letting the paint dry for a few hours is varnishing the stem with a matte acrylic varnish. With all their stems done and varnished and dried overnight, these best boys are ready for their photo shoot. So I've been working on this pumpkin project for about 2 months now, and since my primary motivation for making things is photographing them in a realistic setting, I realized I needed some dinnerware and maybe another food to accompany the pumpkins. So I also made some wooden bowls, plates, and bread to complete the scene. Thank you so much for joining me on this cursed pumpkin face journey. If you try to make some pumpkin faces of your own, please let me know in the comments because I'd love to see them. Thank you so much for watching.